Lots. I mean, voices are the easiest ones because all you have to do is stimulate the cochlea with a set resonant frequency. It's very easy. Voices are very different reasons for blanketing an area and watching people. And 98% of the population probably will not be affected. But it is the fact that you have no choice. And if you upset somebody in the government, they can abuse their authority and target you. 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we've been developing microwave weapons right up to today, and they are incredibly sophisticated today. So if any government says that microwaves have no effect on you, the question is, why have you been spending billions upon billions of dollars with the military for the last 60 years improving them?
Gang stalking and electronic harassment. Now, I was listening to the guy who's a whistleblower, and he was explaining it. You know, he's saying people are getting abducted and taken to Seattle. If you follow me, you probably follow Nicholson 1968, and he put a video out yesterday, and at the very tail end of it, he said something that a lot of us have been waiting to say for a long time. And it's about being a targeted individual. So how's that? I never talk about it because I never wanted to give the people the satisfaction to know that their techniques or whatever they were doing were working. But about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, myself and Erin Elizabeth were exclusively, or not exclusively, we were covering the murders and disappearances of holistic doctors that just kept happening left and right. Well, Erin put a video up, and you can still see it, cancer, and it was going to kill her, and so forth and so on. Someone was hacking her phone, and it was messing with her. So there's that. But what was happening to me is in the middle of the night, at the exact same time, every time, I would wake up and my entire body would be vibrating, like there was electricity going through it. My heart would be racing, so forth and so on. And certain other times, my skin would become hot to the touch, like somebody was holding a magnifying glass on it under the sun. That's electronic harassment. That is telling you to shut up, basically. And I get it, because I cover a lot of stuff. You guys have followed, like they'll suddenly pull taboos. So there's that. Whether I do it knowingly or not, you know, I got a big mouth, so I just say stuff, and sometimes I get in trouble. So there's that. A lot of channels that you guys have followed, like they'll suddenly pull the plug and people will say, Richie, where'd this guy go? Well, you don't understand. When you put yourself out there, they make themselves known, and that's just all there is to it. Think what you want. I don't targeted individuals before, and you watch the videos and these people look like, if you were being messed with by something you can't see, you'd probably be raving too. Why am I talking about it now? Because about 2 years ago, I started talking about the full armor of God, and I tell you guys all the time that I'm a terrible calling out the name of Jesus Christ. Well, it's the same thing with electronic harassment. The only problem is they'll put you into such a panicked state, especially when you're trying to sleep, that you won't be able to remember the Lord's Prayer. You won't be able to remember to say Jesus Christ. You won't be able to speak, which is why you need to completely look inside yourself, and how else to say it, but it works for me. The sleep paralysis thing, I think that's just them messing with people with ELFs, extremely low frequencies, Gwen towers, cell phone towers. The reason they're spraying the atmosphere is frequencies through it and target and control people. And I think the sleep paralysis thing came up, you know, doctors started talking about it, because the military or the elites are doing it to us. It's much like how suddenly adult allergies popped up out of nowhere when it never used to exist. It's not adult allergies, it's just that they're putting so much Everything's genetically modified. All the water is completely impure and unfit for human consumption, and the air is full of heavy metals. So
family, having a decent life, and then can pinpoint the day they noticed stalking and the day they started hearing voices. And, schizophrenia just doesn't come on like with this shooter acutely overnight. And the other thing is that some of the victims that have been mandatoried into psych evals and have gotten either diagnosed with schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, or more often delusional disorder, and have been placed on meds, typically with schizophrenia meds.
Whereby if you beamed microwaves into somebody's ears, the vibrational frequencies in the cochlea, they would actually produce sound in the person's head. So nobody else around you can hear, but just the one person being beamed can hear the sound. And the university were told that this would aid the deaf enormously, because people could talk into a device and they would just hear it straight through. It was also picked up by the superstore manufacturers, who said, well, we can also use this for good, because it didn't take people very long, especially the military and other superstores, to think, well, hang on, we can use this for our own devices. So the military can now put voices into people's heads to do whatever deed they wish it to achieve. And the superstores have also realized that rather than say, put that down, you're going to steal it, if you're indecisive and you're shopping, they can say, you really do want to buy this, and produced a list of all of the illnesses that you can develop from continuous low-level microwave irradiation. Everything. In 1976, your government produced a list of all of the illnesses that you can develop from continuous low-level microwave irradiation. Everything, neurological, physiological illnesses. But in the same document, what I cannot go along with is the fact that 25 categories of persons without their choice, and in many cases without their knowledge, are being experimented upon with these particular frequencies to cause all of this. That is wrong.
What kind of symptoms can people, if this was happening to someone, I guess, at first they might think they're going insane. What kind of symptoms do you hear people talk about when they send you or call you, send you letters?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll kind of break it down into a phased type of event for you. And typically what you see in the first phase is stalking. So it doesn't do a whole lot of good to report that at that point, too. And then the breaking and entering starts. Usually people notice the stalking first. Then they notice that they come home and their stuff has been gone through. Home and their stuff has been gone through. To get a restraining order, you have to prove that there's been physical harm before you can get a restraining order. Then they notice that they come home and their stuff has been gone through. Typically there's nothing stolen, but you will notice that maybe a cigarette's been left burning on your back patio. Your furniture's been slightly moved around. In extreme cases, I've had people come in, including the girl I worked with here, that would come in and see that, there's the smell of wet paint and one wall's been painted a different color. Things like that. And typically, even with that, the police won't do anything about it if nothing's stolen. They'll come and take a report for criminal trespass in your house, but not actually do anything that will necessitate a criminal investigation. After you notice the breaking and entering, the first thing that every one of these victims notices is tinnitus, ringing in the ears. And it's been well elucidated through a number of studies that chronic exposure to electromagnetic fields will cause ringing in the ears. And we see that in MRIs. People that are getting MRI scans of their brains or their knees or whatever damaged part is being looked at will often say that they can hear ringing in their ears, magnetic harassment. Most of them will complain a part of the sleep deprivation is that when they try to close their eyes and go to sleep at night, it looks like a fireworks show going off in their eyelids. And those are magnetophosphines and are pathognomonic of being bombarded with electromagnetic energy. And slowly the tinnitus the ringing in the ears will erode to hearing voices. Those voices aren't typically telling you that they're God or angels, although sometimes they do use that on victims. But they want you to know you're being watched, and they want you to run around telling people you're under surveillance. So typically the voices are describing your whereabouts in a room, what you're wearing, what you look like, what you're thinking about doing, what you've already done, along with usually derogatory comments about the way you're dressed or the way you look.
Wow.
And then the directed
And
energy
these people
attacks.
are complicit in doing this. I mean, this is not like a compartmentalization where they take a person who works at a government agency and puts them in a booth and says, here, record some stuff. I mean, this has got to be like some real-time stuff if they're able to say what you're wearing and what you're doing. I mean, these people are complicit in this.
Yeah.
It just blows
and
my mind.
Most of the time it is done live. Now, there are some victims that seem to be put on an electronic loop, and which is equally distressing because in that type of a loop system, basically you're kind of wired into the system, and what you're actually hearing are your own thoughts being played back to you. And a lot of victims won't pick up on that for a while, and they think it's voices being directed at them when they're actually hearing their own thoughts being returned back to them with a slight delay. So essentially they end up talking to themselves through this electromagnetic communication system. But most of them are being done in real time and not put on the automatic system. Attacks start, then you're right, you do see involuntary body motion, arm jerks, knee jerks, leg jerks, sometimes a full body type of micro seizure, severe heartburn that starts up and, even with treatment won't go away until they stop bombarding the stomach with microwave energy. Severe headaches that start at the back of the skull where the occipital nerves are most shallow along the skull and are easy to hit. Genital attacks are very common, especially in women. They refer to it as electromagnetic rape, and usually that's meant to initially lightly stimulate the woman's vagina with a tingly sensation, usually meant to get them to masturbate, where obviously while perpetrators are watching, but over time becomes painful. But the whole time you're actually hearing the perpetrator's voice, letting you know that they're doing it. Take with that because, the MK Ultra studies were started by some of the leading psychiatrists. So when people say, well, that what you're describing sounds like schizophrenia, well, it was designed to sound like schizophrenia. Ewan Cameron was the president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association and the American Psychiatric Association and worked on a number of these projects, as well as Jose Delgado, that he no longer needed to chip anybody to control them, that it could be done through broadcasting. He had already kind of warned in the 80s that this was coming, that there was no longer a reason to put a chip in the brain to control people, that it could all be done through electromagnetics.
All you need to do is make a microwave transmitter, which is incredibly easy, and add the pulse frequency, which is even easier. You can make these weapons. And what I say to schools is, to the students in schools, I say, please be incredibly careful. Every time you touch a keyboard or an iPad or an iPod, every time you put your finger on any microwave device that transmits, up to 45 countries can be storing that. That 45 countries are actually recording this, and they have the capability. And when you are a graduate and you are a professional, they're going to come back and they are going to sit in front of you one day, if they wish, and they are going to say, do you remember writing that?
Introduced called Common Core curriculum. In conjunction with the microwaves that we're all being faced with, that are certainly causing confusion, inability to sleep, and levels of anger, and all types of emotional, mental, and physical ailments, along with the dumbing down of the global population, whether everyone is targeted or not, they're being targeted through the entire process of the system, even beyond the frequencies. Would you say that's your experience with what?
Why is this all-powerful American doing this to his own country?
Some of them are written by them, though, too. And we're looking at transhumanism now as a coming agenda, where they're going to be bringing online a replacement for humans. And
At the very heart of it, it's the government. But if you have a hard time explaining this, especially to targeted individuals, because when you hear their stories, almost all of them feel like they have a reason why they're being targeted. And in some of them there are. I mean, I've met with a number of whistleblowers. I've had former reconnaissance office personnel come to San Antonio to talk with me. I've had former NSA people come to talk with me that are being victimized after blowing the whistle on one thing or another. But the majority of the victims are, what we would kind of call nobodies, including, myself and the girl I worked with. Yeah, I'm a physician, but in the broad, scheme of things, being a physician in a small town is, not really that big of a deal. It's not like, they're victimizing political leaders or, Bill Gates or, people like that, or they may be, but we just don't know. But the majority of victims are just the common folk. And there are certain cities where you can see a predilection for one type of victim or one type of victimization. But when you crush the numbers and you look at the victims as a whole in surveys, and we've done that, most of them are, highly educated, or at least, high school degreed or college degreed people. Most of them are 35 to 55, 70% are female. Most of those females are also reporting sexual assault along with the electronic assault. It doesn't seem to be on a broad scale aimed at one race or one religion or one political belief. But when you break it down by city, like I said, there's 60 men in Palm Springs that are all gay men, that are all hearing the same voice and being viciously attacked with directed energy weapons. The group here in San Antonio seems to use it mostly as a hired out type of technology of, as I put in the book, is one physician who knows this former FBI guy said he was hiding him from his wife in case he wanted to use him against her to make her appear crazy in a divorce. And one of the other victims that's contacted me here was going through a messy divorce from a very affluent person in the suburbs of San Antonio. And this particular agent was hired to do just that to his ex-wife, draw a mental illness diagnosis on her so she wouldn't have access to her half of the communal property.
Well, that motivation is very sinister. It makes sense. Certainly targeting.
And the motivation, I can tell you the motivation behind that. And the motive, especially if you look at any of the MKUltra sub-projects, it was always done on the people who really didn't have the political clout or the financial clout to really do anything about it. Especially MKUltra, they specifically targeted what we call social outliers, and a lot of the victims of this technology are social outliers. It's people with a former drug history. It's women that are divorced and living alone. I mean, face it, a woman living alone is an easy target for any crime, whether it's electromagnetic crime or anything else. And they know that those people they're going to lack the resources they're not going to have a congressman in the family, or an FBI agent in the family, or a CIA agent in the family that they can turn to, at least to verify, to them what's going on. They're going to turn to their family, who's also, lower middle class or upper middle class, that as soon as they confide in their family member that they're hearing voices and they feel like they're being followed, they're going to get the question that you just asked: why you? You're a nobody.
Right.
And that's asked of these victims all the time. And usually after that is, well, why would anybody want to spend? Do you realize the hundreds of thousands of dollars that it would cost to track you and follow you everywhere? And that's just also simply not true. Satellite surveillance is the most effective and efficient financial way to track someone. Apart from Freedom of Information regarding MKUltra, most of the documents were shredded. What we had to go by, which is also where the money came to start Facebook, which is a data mining program that's worked very successfully, because you don't have to watch people on Facebook. They volunteer the information.
They watch themselves for you.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's
Similar to the psychological tactic gaslighting, where they change the small devices that it's based on a play where they dim the lighting and make the wife doubt that basically she's being messed with, that small elements are being manipulated to make them doubt their own sanity, right?
Well, and then some people do, and I've had victims contact me and actually took themselves to a psychiatrist and got themselves seen. They said, you know what, I woke up one day, I was hearing voices. The media has basically kind of taught us that anyone hearing voices is automatically schizophrenic. So they said, you know what, I'm hearing voices, I must be schizophrenic, I guess I better go see a psychiatrist. And let me tell you something, schizophrenics don't think that way.
To be, made up pranks, it's way too many cases. Frankly, for schizophrenics, there does seem to be a case here. How do we begin to expose, improve this, particularly document it? Can we get people with camera recorders, because their privacy's been invaded already? They're inside their head. Do you have victims who are willing to go through having this documented on cameras, number one? Number two, you outline the technology, and obviously they can piggyback off of existing cell towers, existing satellites, existing EMF technologies, etc. But at what point can we measure this? Certain homes that we know are being targeted. Is there a way of measuring that there's unusual levels of electromagnetic activity, or etc., related technologies? Is there proof of funding for the manpower of the people who are physically going to these homes and doing levels of harassment? These kind of questions.
Well, they're and the same methodology. I mean, these complaints aren't similar. They're exactly the same. The psychiatrist will try to say, well, it's group delusional disorder that's fed by internet contact, and that you attacked, and they're all hearing the same voice. That defies coincidence immediately, because that's, being done via satellite. But there's a slight delay of a week or two, but then the gang stalking starts back up. And it's very obvious that these people are being handed off to another group in the local area. So, but there, like I said, there is a delay. Oftentimes these victims will go, man, I moved to, Dallas, Texas, and now I'm from California, and now I'm free. I haven't noticed anyone following me for a week. And then a couple of weeks later, they'll notice the stalking start back up. Especially if it's early on in their targeting, because the way this works, the stalking is usually, in most cases, an initial phase. The stalking may last several months, and then the stalking kind of tapers off, and then you're left with just hearing voices and being attacked with directed energy. And that's one of the reasons, at least my theory, and Dr. Robert Duncan, who I work with pretty closely, who worked on some of the projects involved with this type of technology, think that not only does the stalking, not only is it a form of COINTELPRO psychological warfare on these victims, but it's also being done to GPS them by vicinity in order to get some form of a biometric identity on them, whether that's cataloging their EEG, getting facial recognition, body recognition. We think that the way the technology actually works is by basically getting a model of their EEG remotely through remote neural monitoring, because all the rest of this seems to be based on accessing the central nervous system and manipulating the brain. And that would be somebody to track them, or you can track them by vicinity with a stalker.
See, and they're working on EEG monitor things that can be hooked into iPhones and stuff now. I mean,
Was a woman in San Antonio who voiced these complaints, and having heard a little bit about the technology and read a little bit about the technology, and knowing this person prior to these complaints, knowing that there was no mental illness and no drug use, involved, decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, especially when she said, I feel like I'm being mind controlled. I'm hearing people talk to me, and I'm, being raped. I said, you know what? There is technology that can do this, and let's see if we can figure it out. So we did some counter surveillance, put some audio or digital audio recorders hidden in her place. Of course, she didn't want video for privacy purposes, but she agreed to audio, so we did audio. And within a week, had people breaking into her place, putting Rohypnol, which is a date rape type drug, in her bottled water and other foodstuffs. But the interesting thing about this is how they were getting the drug in her was subliminally controlling her to get the drug in her. And you could hear that on the recordings that, and I saw it for myself when I would visit her a couple of times, and I would see her drink one bottle of water after another, and I said, man, you must be really thirsty. That's your fifth bottle of water since I've been here. And she's like, this is my first bottle. And I'm like, oh boy, this girl's controlled. Which is exactly how control looks. If for those of you that have never been around somebody that can be placed in an alternate state of control, you can put a red dot on a white wall, and if they're being controlled to see a white wall, they will not see the red dot. It works that well. So, we had the recorders in place, and, sure enough, and, she was at one state in a drugged state, and people were breaking into the back door of her condo, and she was screaming at them to get out and making animal sounds and, banging dishes around, and was very obviously in a drug state. It didn't even necessarily, it wasn't her personality that was coming through on the recording. There were 3 men and her female next-door neighbor who had been helping surveil her, breaking in the back door and digging around through her stuff to find the recorders that had been buried there that they had obviously seen placed. At one point, one of the girls found, or a big girl found one of the recorders, and her mouth was right next to the microphone saying, well, I found it, how do I shut it off? One of the male voices says, just hit some buttons until it goes off. So we counter-surveilled the group that was doing it, had their plate numbers. It came back to be a former FBI agent running a private investigative agency out of San Antonio, who incidentally has been identified independently of me by 2 other people that had been victimized by him. And when we went to complain to the Department of Public Safety, which is kind of like the Texas Highway Patrol, they license PIs, we were told that he had no complaints and had a sterling record. Here, 5 years later, another victim identifies him in a similar type of phenomenon. And I told her, I said, file a formal complaint with the DPS. Now this is, mind you, after I had complained about him, the girl had complained about him, my typist had complained about him, and 2 other people that were involved with the writing of this book had complained about him. When the latest victim, which was just 2 years ago, called to file a formal complaint, she was told he had a sterling record and no complaints had ever been filed. So
somebody looking out for him that's above his station. This is what it sounds like to me. So wow. When we couldn't get any law, and trust me, I have a very good working relationship with SAPD. I went to the lieutenant in charge of the sex crimes unit, and this is all in the book. He said if he was hearing this story from anyone else, that he would think they're crazy. But I had put him to sleep for several surgeries. He was a patient of mine. Several of the other officers were patients of mine. He said, you know what?
a lot of times the crazier the story, the more true it is. And they investigated it. The problem with our case was she was drugged with Rohypnol and, had fleeting memories and mostly nightmarish-like states about the sexual assaults and couldn't actually identify any of the perpetrators. The only thing they could have tried to get this guy for would have been the stalking on her and myself. And at that time, the Texas state laws on stalking were so inept. A year of publishing the book, I had been contacted by roughly 6,000 other people being victimized the exact same way.
Wow. See, that was going to be official, top FBI official Ted Gunderson. He's become part of this movement, and he said he believes that this is far too extensive to really be controlled in a private enterprise. The private enterprise is mostly out for financial gain, and obviously that's not really what's coming out of this, and that this is too well organized and too sophisticated and just too broad, and there must be some sort of central command. This must be some kind of a government type of a situation with multiple satellite offices or something, because it's just too broad, too sophisticated. And I know you had mentioned on your site that all it takes is 3 satellites to really blanket the whole world and achieve these kinds of ends. I mean, who do you ultimately think is behind all this stuff? Because it does seem like a very concerted, very large effort.
Yeah, and Ted Gunderson and I were actually fairly good number of occasions out in Sacramento. And he's right. At the very heart of it, it's the government. But if you look back at the early MKUltra studies, whenever this type of research was done, typically it was done through a front company or it was guised as legitimate research through a university.
It was a cover-up report, and finally a very renowned professor, I think he has about 18 professorships, John Goldsmith, he wrote the definitive proper report and found that low-level microwaves were causing an enormous amount of cancers and leukemias and ill effects. And by then, everybody was leaping onto the microwaves as stealth weapons, and they go from there, which was the 50s, right up to and including the present day. Ladies were protesting about having American missiles on English soil. And it was a peaceful protest that from the American base, the ladies were being microwaved, and it was actually measured. They were being microwaved to make them sick. And in fact, when the figures came out, there was a disproportionate amount of tumours, personality changes, suicidal tendencies of the ladies. They were deliberately microwaved by the Americans for protesting about their base. Pulse frequency, you can just make people so suicidal, they can't be bothered to act like a demonstrator anymore. All they want to do is sleep or lay in bed all day. So, so if you're targeting demonstrators, you make them suicidally depressed, and they don't care about demonstrating anymore because they're too upset. If it was a specific psychiatric illness, you would have an infrared device that followed the person, and you would link it to a pencil-thin microwave source, so the microwave beam would always target a specific gland or a specific part of the brain or an eye or a heart. So you would have them being targeted. And it was an experiment. One of the experiments was to take an ordinary sane person, cause insanity, and have a psychiatrist who was unknown to everybody diagnose schizophrenia or paranoia or a psychiatric illness. That was a successful outcome. And the person would spend the rest of their life in an asylum in misery, but to the government scientists, that was a success.
Well, it's a guinea pig.
You can be driven to insanity and death, and you just become a tick in a box without any so much as a feeling. Yeah, and this is what they do, and this is why they are above the law. Yeah, I mean, voices are the easiest ones because all you have to do is stimulate the cochlea with a set resonant frequency. It's very easy. Voices are very easy, and it isn't people imagining voices. They physically hear them. They physically hear, as I'm talking to you. My voice isn't inside your brain. My voice goes no further than an inch into your ear, no further at all. It's the electrical signal that makes you interpret how I sound. And once you've got this electrical signal, which can be a chip or lots of things, you can physically make people hear voices, certain voices, and it can be any conversation, and it can be anybody you want to hear. It can be a soft, angelic voice. It can be a god. It can be something that scares you, like a devil. It can be anything. In a 3-month period, I had 5 lady police officers in this house, all with cancer. I've had a series of calls from officers saying that their personalities have been changed. Whenever I go to a country, and I think the year before, I did 6 countries, I think last year or the year before, the questions always come around to Tetra, and they always come around to aggressive behaviour from the police since they started using Tetra. And I have the government documents that say this can cause neurological damage, this can cause cancer, this can cause aggressive behaviour and personality changes. This was at the beginning of the experiment, and the experiment with Tetra is not due to finish until 2018. So it's an experimental system. The United States one was quite interesting. It was to do with special forces. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, they came back from a mission, and of the 6 or 8 gentlemen that were in the special forces, 5 of them, I believe, went home. I think it was 5 or 6 went home and severely beat their wives or children or both, where some of the wives died, some ended up in hospital, but they were severely beaten. And it was believed that the communications apparatus they were using was in training the brain and stimulating violence. And this was Fort Bragg. Now, I either had a phone call from Fort Bragg or I had a phone call from the embassy to ask if I knew what frequencies could cause this. Because I ended up talking to each. And I said, don't tell me, I will tell you what frequencies they have been using. Now, the special forces don't just hold them up, they're on permanently. So we're talking massive entrainment, far beyond what the ordinary person would suffer. But it induced such a level of entrainment and violence. So I told them what frequencies I believed they would be using. I sent them documentary evidence and the whole thing. I mean, cancers are reaching epidemic proportions. There are lots of different types of cancers coming up now. I know in China, they've just had a 3,000% increase in parotid gland cancer, which is the side of the face where you would hold a mobile. We're getting cancers of the eye coming up. Obviously, brain tumours. In fact, brain tumours are quite enormous now in terms of numbers. That I read a report, and I read this out in Canada last year. People are so worried about the numbers of brain tumours that they've re-diagnosed 10,000 brain tumours as endocrine cancers to take them off the statistics. European Union, we have been told that cancers are at epidemic proportions, and we're talking generally cancers between the ear and the brain. Talk about things to do with heat, and that is it. So they won't even discuss anything else. They will deny anything that doesn't have anything to do with heat. Yeah. They even deny all of their 40 years of research leading up to this. Yeah. Although they said this can cause cancer and all the damage, they say, no, it can't. We're only looking at heat, and heat is all that matters. Yeah. And the English government has been lying to the people. And the American government, the Canadian, the Australian, they have been lying. They have been lying to protect industry, protect their profits, to protect themselves from lawsuits. They are really just liars, and it's provable. Birmingham, in this country, probably 15 years ago, and I haven't changed it since. And I've said that I believe that this industry and the part of the government which is encouraging them will be responsible for more civilian deaths and suffering than all the terrorist groups in the world ever. And people are probably going to cause more death and suffering than the entire Second World War. And is that genocide? Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. And are they going to get away with it? Yes, because they are untouchable. They are outside the law.
Who is sanctioned by the WHO?
Sanctioned by the World Health Organization, without a shadow of a doubt. It is the same people. It's the same people sit on the ICNIRP certificate. They sit on our government's Health Protection Agency, sit on the World Health Organization. It's the same people. It's the same people. There's probably no more than 20 of them. But they are going to, in my opinion, commit the worst genocide this planet has ever known.